All right, so welcome to my talk. This is Dark Mode Maximalism, or how I learned to stop worrying and fix the GUI. And so as it suggests, we're going to talk about the Bitcoin Core GUI and the work being done to revitalize it and to fix it. But first, a little about me. So this is the part of the talk where I get to talk about me and you have to listen. So I'm Harold, and I like the GUI. I primarily work on the GUI. I'm a Bitcoin Core contributor, and I'm sponsored by SuperLunar. And SuperLunar is also a sponsor of this event. And on the bottom right is my GitHub username and my Twitter username. So I'm attending this conference to farm some Twitter followers, so follow me. So agenda. We'll start off with what the Bitcoin Core GUI is, and I thought this would be important to do because when I started contributing, I didn't know that Bitcoin Core had a GUI, and maybe some of you might be in the same boat. Then we'll get into State of the GUI report, and that'll be me complaining about what's wrong with the GUI. We'll talk about where we're going to go, and that's the work that's being done to fix the problems that I complain about. And then at the end, I'm going to force all of you to contribute to the new GUI. And if you don't contribute, you don't get lunch. And so you're going to join us. I got to click in two different places. So first, what is the Bitcoin Core GUI? To lay some framework down, there's two repos to consider here when talking about the GUI. There's Bitcoin/Bitcoin, which I'm sure a lot of you know if you're here. And that's the main Bitcoin repo. That's where the main development occurs. In June 2020, we separated out GUI development from Bitcoin/Bitcoin into Bitcoin Core/GUI. It makes sense to move out development of different parts like the GUI, the wallet, into their own repo so people work on what they care about and get notifications about what they care about. So that was a primary reason behind that. Another reason was some developers didn't like the notifications from the GUI, and so we moved it out. But in this repo is where GUI development occurs, and then it's a mono repo. So when something is merged here, it's automatically merged into the main repo. And when something is merged into the main repo, it's automatically merged here. So they're kept in sync. And if you wanted to grab or compile, run the GUI, you could get it from either repository. It's the same. If you wanted to compile, it's an exercise to the reader. You'd look at the build docs. You'd compile. There's a Bitcoin Qt binary. You could run it. Or you could download a release binary from bitcoincore.org. As a little side note here, the Windows and the Mac OS installation binaries, that would be the .exe and .dmg, it only contains the GUI. So just to kind of highlight, there are users of the GUI, because if you download that, it's only the GUI. But if you download the tarball, then it includes all these other utilities and these other binaries that you could run. So if you were to run the GUI, the Qt widgets GUI, the current GUI, this is what you'd see. So on the left is what happens when you run it. There's no default wallet created, so it's a manual step. You click Create Wallet. And then on the right, it's in dark mode, which is very important. And that's what it looks like after you create a wallet. And this is just kind of showing you what it is in case you've never seen it before. Now, if you run the Bitcoin Core GUI for the very, very first time, as in there's no data directory, it knows that it's running for the first time, there's no default data directory there yet, this is what you're faced with. And I wanted to highlight this because people who run the GUI for the first time, this is essentially their onboarding wizard. And so if you think about when you get a new phone or a new computer and you're setting it up, it takes you through the options, it tells you what's going to happen, set some expectations. And this is what you're faced with when running the GUI. You have two options, right? You can set a data directory and you can prune. And there's kind of a wall of text that isn't so informative. And this is your journey into running the GUI. So to start, I wanted to set some basic terminology. And I don't think anybody's going to really disagree with this. And this is just kind of dictate what the Bitcoin Core GUI is as an idea. So it's a graphical user interface, of course. Sorry, I lost it here. It's a graphical user interface. That's what GUI means. It's a full node, so it can be pruned or archival. What that means is that the Bitcoin Core GUI validates all of the consensus rules. So anybody who runs the GUI is a full node on the network. And it's also a wallet. So it can be a hot wallet, as in the keys are on the device, or we have external signer functionality. So the keys can be kept on an external signer, and you interface with the GUI and the external signer. And that's a little advertisement on the top, just to kind of, as a nod to the free open source software that it is. There's never any business plan. And I think with this, I wanted to get into why the Bitcoin Core GUI, and why not just let things like Spectre and Spyro and these like sort of free market systems develop good GUIs. It's because there needs to be a common goods project where it's a great option to run. There's never any business plan or anything that could ever influence it. It's Bitcoin Core. And so it's just a great option for somebody who doesn't, who their security assumption is Bitcoin Core. So, state of the GUI. Please stand to pledge allegiance to Satoshi Nakamoto. So, again, as I explained in the beginning, I'm going to complain about what's wrong with the GUI. First of all, there's a ton of locks, like on this bridge. And a lock is when, so in this context, it'll be when the main GUI thread is blocked because there's some event that's preventing user input from being captured by the main GUI thread, and it's that's going to occur until that other action is done or that event is done. And so if you're syncing and you have a wallet loaded, and if you've ever run the GUI, you'll notice that there's so many locks. I mean, you'll try to move your mouse, click a button, and nothing is responding. And so it's just, it's legacy, right? I mean, it happens sometimes in development. People develop certain code, it includes locks, it stays, people don't fix it, and we've kind of just inherited that within the Qt widgets GUI. But this is something that could be fixed. It's just that it's a lot harder to remove locks. Like these physical locks, it's pretty hard to remove them. And software locks is pretty hard to remove as well, but it can be done. We have a lot of spaghetti within the Bitcoin Core GUI. And so we have a lot of spaghetti code. We have unnecessary wiring between the front end and the back end, but also it's just legacy development behind the GUI. Sometimes you have to chase around different files it shouldn't be to figure out how a certain feature in the GUI works. Ultimately, you have to go through different objects and different classes and different files. And so a lot of spaghetti with the back end and the front end. And some of this has to do with the Qt widgets framework. And so with the Qt widgets framework, if you wanted to develop this sort of a UI element, so for example, I have the edit address dialog here as an example. One, you have this sea of XML that you'd have to go through, and you'd have to like parse it, and it hits you like a wave. But then if you want to really interact with it, you're going to have to do some stuff on the C++ side. So you'll do like UI, set up UI like this, and then UI a certain field. This occurred, so now I want this to update like that. And if we want designers to do anything on the GUI, I think this is a really high barrier of entry for them to come and work, because not only would they have to come and deal with this, then they have to also learn C++, right? And also just as a mental burden, even as a developer, if you want to improve something, having to deal with both of these things, it's kind of, it discourages you. And another thing that's wrong with the GUI, and I mean, this is just a fact, it's pretty ugly. And there's just something about an application being not as beautiful that makes you see it as less. And I think we've all seen that with certain applications, and this is just one thing with the Bitcoin Core GUI. Another thing, and this has to do with the development process behind the GUI and things that have happened. So here we have GigaBrain Chad, and he's a reviewer. And so GigaBrain Chad, he notices that there's a new PR, and it introduces a really cool feature into the GUI. He also notices that it introduces a button. So he has a great idea. He doesn't like the button's color, so he's going to knack the PR. And then developers want him to expand on it because the feature is great. Just because this button doesn't look good Why would you knack it? And he leaves. This has happened several times on different features, but I think with this, I wanted to sort of get across that within the Bitcoin Core GUI repo, there's been a lot of bike shedding that has discouraged development because people can't agree on this color, or developers can't agree on a color, or agree on like the size, or this button should be here. And so this just has been a problem within the repo overall. And so to get some common terminology again, and to sort of wrap up what was said there, so the Bitcoin Qt widgets GUI is slow and unresponsive. It's very ugly. It's unintuitive to use because developers just kind of put in there what they wanted, and there was no real thought of how does somebody use that. And refactoring it into a better state is almost impossible. And to break that down, I gotta do it here. So I talked about the locks, and so technically that could be done, but it doesn't fix the problem that it's ugly. It doesn't fix the problem that we have GigaChad, BrainChad reviewers that leave amazing reviews like that. And it doesn't fix this wiring with the Qt widgets framework that we use. And so we could try to remedy something, but I don't think that if we tried to refactor and put in so much effort to refactor that code base, that we'd ever get to a point where we'd have a GUI where, you'd like it. Like you could be proud of it and say, this is a good application. I don't think we'd ever get to that point with the code base. So what we're going to do is, and if I can get there, eventually. And so now we'll talk about where we're going. So what we're going to do is, we'll get there. We're going to start over. That's what we're going to do. We're literally going to start from first principles. We're going to attempt a complete rewrite. And we're going to make changes from the very beginning that remedy these problems that I mentioned before. And so this is sort of the mission statement behind the Bitcoin Core / GUI QML repo. It's in the README, and I wanted to read this to you guys. So the current Bitcoin Core GUI has gathered enough technical debt and hacked on features. It is time to begin anew. This project will start from a clean slate to produce a feature-rich GUI with intuitive user flows and first-class design. Now, QML, I wanted to have its own slide here. This is the framework we're going to use instead of Qt widgets. It's still Qt, but it allows us to really delineate the front end and the back end so that it's a declarative language. So you write the UI files in a few lines of QML, not in a sea of XML and then C++. And so that's one thing that'll allow us to sort of lower the barrier of entry for a designer to come in, possibly, and help develop the QML GUI and have their expertise on how the design should be. But also, if you've noticed with we're able to delineate the front and the back end, that helps with the spaghetti code. And so with QML, an amazing thing is the back end, it doesn't even have to do anything with Qt. Like it doesn't have to be a Q object or anything like that. It can be just pure C++, and then you will register properties with the QML engine, and that'll be available in QML. And so when you make QML components, you're gonna bind a property to this registered property from C++, and that'll guide the UI and update the UI, and QML does a lot of the heavy handling behind that. And so what it means is that whereas before you had hundreds of lines of XML, you could have 20 lines of QML, property bindings, and then that's it, that's the component. And there's not much to the C++ side except property binding a variable that was important, and that drives the GUI. So some principles for this new GUI, as we're attempting to rewrite, let's discuss the principles that we want to keep in mind. Designer-driven design. Designers are designers and developers are developers. It's the way it is. We have different skill sets, and designers can make something nice, and developers can make something that's very technical, right? And necessarily, there's not always an overlap. And so there's a very vibrant Bitcoin design community, and I want to tap into that, right? These people are there contributing, making a design guide, and we should incorporate that. So we are. We're going to incorporate the best practices from the Bitcoin design guide. But other than that, we're going to extract some talent from the Bitcoin design community and force them to kind of help us. And so that's what we have. They're forced, but they're doing it. No, that's a joke. So this is documentation on the design decisions that have been made for the new QML GUI. And I'll show you some of the views, but this is documentation on why things are being done certain ways, right? And so this documentation is so important because when GigaBrainChat comes around, he has to look at this, right? And there's really good reasons here why something was made a certain way, and you can't just then show up to the repo and be like, I don't like it, right? So to further sort of drive that point, we have Figma. We've separated out the design development from the technical development. So the designers live on their channels. So Figma, they have a Bitcoin design repo, and they have this website where they have documentation. And so all of that lives there. If you see like these little bubbles, it's Christoph and Bosch, and they're discussing, oh, should we do this? Should we do that? So all of this documentation lives there. And so if you had a new designer who wanted to come in, they could catch up with the discussion, but also a developer who's questioning why this looks like that. If they get to the point where they want to question it, we'll read up on it. No. Okay, there you go. Yeah, and so again, more documentation on really granular documentation on the colors to be used, how buttons should be, the specifications behind like the corners and the colors and the sizes that like the padding between different elements. And so all of this is going to prevent bike shedding. If you don't agree, go to the channels, talk to the designers, and open an issue, and I'll show that here as well. But we want to make it clear that within this new GUI and in the Bitcoin Core /GUI QML, what's going to occur is technical development and getting the GUI shipped, and we implement the designer's design. And we're not going to be fighting about, oh, is this that color or is this that size? And so that fixes that problem. So for example, here, I have an issue that I opened up because I had certain questions about the design. And so this is what GigaBrainChat would have to do. He'd have to come here and express his concerns about the design, and not within the PR that implements the design and implements the functionality. And another thing that I'm really excited about is accessibility. So I've seen throughout the years many articles about how like Bitcoin client software doesn't care about disabled people, especially blind people. And there's a quote here. I meant to put in the link to the article, but it's a Bitcoin.com article, and it was a blind person being interviewed. And so he said, I fear developers just don't think about accessibility for disabled people 99% of the time, and that won't change. And so that was true, but that's going to change. So with QML, it makes it really easy on us. We add a few fields so that a screen reader is able to pick up what that element is and read back to the user. Okay, so it's a button. This is the text behind it. This is the description of it. So like if you were to press its action, it'll show the next page. And then there's an on-press action. And then that communicates with the screen reader software, and the screen reader software will tell them how to sort of press the action. And so we don't really have to do much, right? And so we can do this so easily, and so we are going to focus on making it accessible. Another thing that makes us want to focus on it is the Bitcoin design people. They've been working on a section for accessibility. So we'll have this sort of content to see how good our accessibility is, and sort of like a guide point to check up on. But then, of course, we'll want to test it with actual blind people and see how well they're able to navigate through the new GUI. And so something I'm really excited about. Third one is very self-explanatory. Don't introduce locks. We're not going to introduce any code changes ever into the repo that introduce locks. It's just a very solid principle. It's a lot easier to never introduce them than to remove them. Less spaghetti. Also, very self-explanatory. We want to keep the code base clean. We want to keep the code clean. We want to keep it maintainable. So I guess right now there's a big effort into revitalizing it, but there might not always be this big effort, and maintaining it should be well documented, the code should be clean, and people should be easily able to onboard and do new things with it. So a little on the roadmap. And with the roadmap, what it really is just internal milestones that we want to hit. And so there's two milestones. There's version 1 and version 2. And then it would be shipped. If there's consensus, it would be included in a Bitcoin Core. I don't expect there to be much contention, because if it's a fine one-on-one replacement, who would object, right? So V1 is going to be the node runner. And so what that is it's just going to get you to the point where it's just running a node. It's not going to be able to hold any keys or communicate with an external signer. It's just going to run a node. And the reason that we want to focus on this is that, and I talked about this a little bit at the beginning, is onboarding is such an important part of running a Bitcoin application. And we have no onboarding, essentially, right, with the current Bitcoin Core GUI. And so we want to get the onboarding process just down packed, where anybody runs through it and the expectations are set, right? Now, we might be technical at this conference, and so we know if you're running a GUI, it's going to take a long time to sync with the chain. Certain things are going to happen. It does certain things. But not everybody is going to have sort of that expectation. They think, OK, I'm going to run a Bitcoin application, and then I'm going to have Bitcoin on it, right? No, you got to sync with the chain. And so we have to explain this when you're running a full node client. So the V1 is getting down onboarding so that it explains the expectations. It sets the expectations properly, but also allows you to customize it. And then one thing we want to do, keeping with the theme of sort of guiding the user and setting expectations, is introducing visual elements that get across what's going on. And one thing that I'm excited about is this block clock design. So it'll be an element where it'll be like a clock, right? There's 12 hours on its face, and it'll show you like the blocks as they come in. Now, the length of each block will be how long it stayed as the tip. And so it's like a small little thing that lets you know, did blocks come in fast? Were they slow? And so that sets certain expectations as to like, when might the next one come in? It lets you know the tip, the block time. And then another thing there is the like connection status. So one thing that's important is having a sort of quick visual reference as to the quality of your connection to the network. And so you kind of quickly want to know, especially if you're on these sort of alternative networks like I2P and Tor, you want to know how good is your connection to other nodes. And so this is just a quick formula with, so you know, you have 2 block relay, then you're going to have 8 full relay. And so we just do some math there, depending on how many you have. And so then it'll be 5 if you have all of the specified targets. And of course, this can be customizable. So it'll just pick up on what you've customized to be the limits with those. And so if you've reached all the targets, 100%. If you're not there, 40%. If we're looking, it's blinking, right? And I think it's a really powerful little tiny thing, but thinking about these things, I feel provides a better experience for anyone, whether you're technical, whether you're not technical. It provides a much better experience with the client software. And again, with this block clock, we can experiment and do many things. So there's different designs, like when you're connecting, we can just do so many things with this one element that's always there, kind of like in the middle or in a corner. We'll see where it goes with the wallet. But it's so useful in expressing what the underlying Bitcoin node is doing. And so I'm just really excited about that. And of course, we'll have a console. It's important for developers. We will hide this under developer options. It's just you have to go through a loophole. Just info, settings, then go to console, because people can be scammed through the console. And I think there have been occurrences of that where people are convinced to sort of disclose certain information from commands. And so just hide that with developer options, and that's a good little improvement. Version 2 will be the wallet. That we have not worked on yet. But after we get version 1 shipped, we will continue full force into that. The Bitcoin Design Guide, of course, has really good best practices behind that. We do have a mock-up of maybe how we do it on mobile. And I guess this is a good point to talk about, that with QML and how extensible it is in the reactive design, it becomes a question of implementing the build system support to support iOS. We do already support Android, and we test what we're building on Android, at least on testnet. iOS will be a monster to deal with, maybe side loading, I don't know. But that is something that we'd be able to do, and it is something we want to do in terms of getting it on there. I think right now, I think everybody would agree, maybe it's a bad idea to put a full node on a phone, but let's see what happens. Maybe in the future, they're a lot more powerful and it's easy to do. And so everybody would be running their full node on their phone. I don't know, we'll see. And this is a node running on an iPhone, and so it was side loaded. This is kind of like an early version of the block clock, but we're experimenting. And with this GUI QML, we're gonna experiment. And we're gonna try to deliver something really good, revitalize the GUI, and increase its importance because there are users. And then from then on, I hope that people continue to come in and contribute and join us. And so now we'll talk about joining us. So there's a couple of people working on it. There's me, Habasto, ProMag, Christoph, Mo, Shashwat. And then there's you, and there's you too. And you don't really have an option because I've already talked with the organizers and you don't get lunch unless you contribute. No, but join us. We have calls every I put in the wrong time. Anyways, we have calls every Wednesday at 14 UTC. The next call will be this next Wednesday, not on June 1st. So join us if you want to. You can just hang out, listen to us discuss what we're working on and what we're doing. So join us. The issues are posted there, and so I post the call schedule on Bitcoin Design/meta. So write down the link. You'll see the schedule posted every month, and yeah, awesome.